Thank you for joining us here at Civic Hall. We are here for our recap of what happened at the 65th public meeting of the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers, or familiarly known as ICANN. By way of introduction, my name is Joe Catapano. I am the manager for Stakeholder Engagement for the North America region here at ICANN. And immediately to my right, we have Greg Shatan here, who is the president of the New York chapter of the Internet Society and very involved in the ICANN community. In a few minutes, we have on our way Judith Hellerstein, who is a member of our North America Regional at-Large organization, which represents the Internet end user. And she'll be talking to us about a couple of our hot topics from ICANN 65. And then remotely via Skype, we have Chris Mondini, who is the Vice President for Global Stakeholder Engagement at ICANN for the North America region as well. So for those of you out there, and we have the live stream going as well, but for those of you here, what is the knowledge level of ICANN? How many people know nothing about ICANN?
I know something.
All right, so we got something. We have one person who doesn't know, who's not familiar. Okay. Are there any, before we get started, are there any specific topics people came to hear about?
So I invest in domains.
Okay.
So I own .university, whatever. So curious more about, I don't have any .org, but they've been increasing prices, verticals, and removing caps. So I'm curious, why did they do, and maybe other topics.
Okay. Yeah, well, we'll see. I'm sure questions will come up as we go through. Okay. But so we'll get started here. And I think I'm going to turn it over to Chris to talk a little bit about ICANN, who we are, what we do, and a bit of our policy development process, which is really the crux of what happened at ICANN 65, which is our policy forum. So it's really deep, roll your sleeves up policy work at ICANN. So without further ado, Chris, if you want to take it away.
Hi, Joe. Thanks for the intro. Hi, everyone. Thanks to Civic Hall for hosting us. I'm delighted to be here. The Internet now connects 3.8 billion people, which is considerably more people than we have in the room right now. But I understand there are some people coming later to join the audience, and I hope that this intimate setting will allow for conversation and questions. I wanted to spend less than 5 minutes talking about what ICANN does and its important role in the expanding global and interoperable Internet. We think of the Internet as one single global network, but in fact it's many tens of thousands of independently owned and operated networks. And they only look like one network because they use some protocols in common, including the common addressing system. It's really one of the only things that requires any central coordination because the Internet was designed to be distributed and resilient and very networky. And so ICANN is the organization that was established to help coordinate these resources for the global Internet. We're a nonprofit based in California, but we really are a gathering place for a global community of many thousands that I'll talk about in a minute. To reach any place on the Internet or to connect any device onto the Internet, you need a name or a number. You need to type something into a browser, or you need an IP address. And all of these numeric addresses and domain names are maintained by ICANN in directories or databases and made available to programmers and manufacturers and people that need them. So on the one hand, there's a very important technical role that ICANN provides in providing these many, many hundreds of millions address possibilities and billions in the case of numeric addresses to the world. The other important thing that ICANN does is it gathers an international community of policymakers, of volunteers, that help evolve the policies around these addresses because they don't remain static. Just as the internet evolves, addresses and domain names evolve, and there's innovation and change in them too. And we'll talk about some of those in just a moment. As I said, the ICANN community has many thousands of volunteers around the world that are mainly in 4 big stakeholder categories. There are users in civil society, people like you in the room and colleagues that are joining us in the presentation. There are businesses, of course. It was very much a private sector-led initiative in the early days. There are governments from 178 different countries, and there are technical experts. And they're really broken up into different supporting organizations and committees that help make the policies. Joe and I work for something called the ICANN organization, or ICANN.org as we affectionately call it, and we support this community to make its policies. Yes, in big public meetings like the one we had in Marrakech last month, and the one we're having in Montreal in November. There are 3 of those a year. They're open, they're free, they're live streamed, they're interpreted in 7 languages, and you can all participate from wherever you sit if you have connectivity. In addition to those meetings, though, there's a lot of online working groups and conference calls and webinars that are people thrashing out policy developments. And I just want to talk in a little bit more detail about that. Finally, the board of directors, which comes from 20 different countries around the world and represents all of those stakeholder categories that I talked about. If the community reaches consensus, the board ratifies the policy, and it becomes a new way for addresses to be used or deployed, or policies around how those addresses are used for all of the internet. So the policy development process, there's a slide with a diagram demonstrating it. The key thing to keep in mind is it is what we call bottom-up, which means that you, as a member of a community, can come up with an idea for an innovation. And an innovation might be internet domain names, web addresses that have different alphabets or accents in them, or a new expansion of domain names for what comes after the dot, the so-called top-level domain names. It could be something about a country code top-level domain, like the 2-letter codes for different countries, or it could be about a security aspect of the domain name system. And on the left side of the slide is listed really 3 supporting organizations that are key to originating the policies, one being the Numeric Address Organization, one being that country code, those 2-letter country codes like .fr for France or BR for Brazil, and then one called the Generic Names Supporting Organization. And they are, again, these extensions after the dot as we enter addresses into our browsers, which used to be just a handful of well-known ones like .com or .edu, and now include many, many more, over 1,200 different options for these web extensions as a result of policy development. Essentially, without going through every step, what happens is an organization proposes a policy and, with the agreement of the community, launches a policy development process. A policy development process really consists of a couple rounds of drafting a proposal, accepting public comments from all of you, anybody, again, who wants to submit public comments, and from across the community, having a consultation with the community, and doing another round of open public comments, during which the organizations along the bottom of the slide have a very important role. They're called advisory committees, and they include advisory committees of the user groups, which are the at-large, the governments, the governmental advisory committee, experts who concern themselves with the security and stability of the addressing system of the internet, the so-called ISAC, and the really stewards of the what are called the root zone, the main address book that everybody refers to that gets updated by ICANN policies, called the RSAC. So these 3 supporting organizations on the left And the four communities at the bottom in the committees are all areas that you might have an interest in following specifically, and that we can get into as we talk about some of the activities that took place in Marrakech. So I went over my time. I'm going to let Joe talk about Marrakech itself, and I'll stick around to answer questions. Hopefully we'll be not jargony and not too many acronyms, and if you want to just make it a more conversational approach, we can certainly do that as well. Thanks.
Thank you, Chris. So just a little bit about ICANN 65. As I mentioned, ICANN 65 is one of the 3 public meetings that ICANN hosts a year. This was our policy forum, which was a shorter meeting. Again, really focused on face-to-face interaction between those supporting organizations and advisory committees that Chris mentioned, getting involved deeply in the different policy areas of work, which we'll talk about a few of them. What we covered today is just really the highlights of some of the hot topics that were going on at the meeting. It's not a comprehensive list of everything, but we think it gives a good snapshot of what happened at the meeting. It's just a few stats on the meeting itself. So we had about a little over 170 public sessions. It was our 3rd time in Marrakech. We'd been there before in 2016 and 2006. And we had, you can see our different stats on our, some of our social media and our online interactions as well. And so we'll dive right into a little bit of what happened at the meeting. One of the hotter topics at the meeting was the ICANN and the European Union General Data Protection Regulation. So the GDPR was something that went into effect on May 25th of 2018, and it granted greater privacy rights to folks in the European Union. And the intersection with ICANN, the nexus there is that ICANN manages what is referred to as the WHOIS database, and that provides information on who registers a website. So it'll provide name and address and whatever, some cases phone number and so on and so forth. So the GDPR gives people the ability to block that information, essentially. And so that has implications for registries and registrars that sell websites to registrants and their obligations under ICANN contracts. So if we go back to ICANN's 62nd public meeting, that was when the GNSO developed what was called an expedited policy development process. And they took a look at what needed to be in place for ICANN to comply with the GDPR. And they developed something that was called a temporary specification, which was essentially some rules of the road that were put in place temporarily so that ICANN and registries and registrars could comply with the GDPR while they figured out a permanent solution. And that temporary specification was in place for 1 year. And the EPDP, as it's called, went through what was phase 1 of their work, and they developed several recommendations around GDPR that they submitted to the ICANN board, and the ICANN board ratified most of those. And then in Marrakech, they moved into what we refer to as phase 2, and that was discussing a lot of the the details around requesters and how they would get information relative to GDPR and the WHOIS database. And they looked at the future engagement between ICANN and the data protection authorities in Europe, and looked at what we call the unified access model, which is kind of a fancy name for what the access would be to the WHOIS information. They looked at the work of the what we call the technical study group, which was a group of about 10 people who had expertise in certain registration protocols, and they helped advise on what would eventually be the protocol for the compliance with GDPR. Greg,
Joe, if I could
please
chime in a little bit.
Add some color.
To put this in a little bit more of a practical context, WHOIS is basically the way that you can find out, or could find out, who owns a domain name, whether you have a technical issue with them or you might want to have offer them, make an offer to buy the domain name, or you may have a legal issue with them. Because of the interpretation of GDPR as limiting the ability to display the personal data of EU data subjects, the WHOIS essentially went dark in many ways on May 25th, 2018, when the enforcement of GDPR commenced. So as a result, if you want to see who owns a domain, now what you'll see in many cases, and not just for sites located in the EU, but all over the world, you'll just see redacted for privacy. And so there are already privacy services that if you don't want people to know that you own a domain, you can, for a small additional fee, pay for a privacy service, or you can do what so many people do, which is to register in the name of Donald Duck or Mickey Mouse, although there is a requirement for WHOIS accuracy, so you could get burnt by that. But the end result of this tension between the data privacy of GDPR and the public directory of WHOIS has so far temporarily ended up being resolved largely in favor of data privacy. And the issue, that creates issues for all sorts of stakeholders, whether it's law enforcement or domain owners or domain people who wish to be owners of specific domains, whether it's people dealing with security threats. It creates significant difficulties. On the other hand, under GDPR, personal data can't be displayed or processed, generally speaking, without a legitimate interest or the consent of the data subject. So creates quite a tension. And WHOIS is literally, or was literally, accessed millions of times a day before this. And now the issue is how to deal with not bulk access, but how to deal with the consistent flow of information from people who want it. So the unified access model is really an attempt to have some sort of accreditation and process that would streamline this ability, because you can't process each of these things individually. It would take thousands of employees that literally don't exist. So, and since there's really, the financial aspects of this are up in the air, the need to automate this is the problem. So there's, within the stakeholder communities of ICANN, there quite a tension between those who would like to WHOIS basically to go away, those who wish WHOIS was public but realize it can't be, and those who just want to get the job done, which is to create a compliant, GDPR compliant WHOIS system that works for everybody. And so we're heading into phase 2 with a new chair for the EPDP, Yanis Karklins, who's I think an Estonian diplomat, has dealt with a lot of difficult multinational groups, so hopefully he'll be able to deal with us. The leader of Phase 1 got the Ethos Award for surviving the first phase without too many severe wounds, and he's probably very happy to have the Ethos Award and not be the chair. Joe?
Great. Okay, thanks, Greg. If you're just joining us, please go grab a drink or some food. We got plenty over there. Yeah, and Judith has flyers, and welcome, Judith. I didn't even, yes, you came in, so it's great to have you with us. So that's a little bit about GDPR. We can talk more about it in the Q&A if you have more questions on that. Right now, we're going to move into the domain name space and a little bit more about the working groups that worked in the space of generic top-level domains. Here's a look at the delegations for the round of new gTLDs, the more than, I think it's 1,200 that Chris was talking about earlier that are in the root zone of the internet. And you can see the distribution chart of the different regions and where those new names are delegated to. So there's two working groups that we'll talk about. Greg's going to go over a few minutes on each of them. One is the subsequent procedures working group, which is taking a look at what is necessary to be in place for the next round of gTLDs, whenever that happens, and then the rights protection mechanisms related to gTLDs as well. So I'll turn back over to Greg, please.
Thanks, Greg Shatan here for the transcript, as we like to say in ICANN meetings. I'm so used to doing that. In any case, the subsequent procedures working group, and the name is kind of is sort of obscure. Originally, it was going to be the working group about the next round and the rounds after that. But people don't want to admit or make it sound like we're going to only give out top-level domains and rounds. It might be an always open system or some batching system, so therefore we use the word procedures instead of rounds. But what we're planning for right now is the next round, because the next round is going to be a round. In other words, there's going to be an opening and a closing date by which you can file an application to get a new top-level domain. The first time around, the application fee was $185,000. So if you've got $185,000 under your mattress, that'll get you started. Probably cost 2 to 3 times that to actually put in an application and have the technical readiness to operate a top-level domain. In any case, the working group has been produced an initial report, which went out for public comment a few months ago. The public comments came back commenting on the various plans and ideas that the working group had about how things would go the next time around. And there are quite a number of issues about what worked and what didn't work the last time around, and what worked for some people didn't work for other people, and trying to figure out where you can rebalance certain issues. So during ICANN 65, the group met 4 times, twice as the full working group, in order to discuss these public comments and basically try to digest what various stakeholders and communities and governments and others said about how things should go the last time.
Can you tell us a little bit about what they said? A little bit of feedback or thoughts from communities?
Sure. In this case, I think from the community we saw concerns about for instance, we had a meeting today to discuss the issue of freedom of expression rights of applicants versus rights of non-applicants and others, whether it's the rights of governments or the rights of trademark holders or the rights of consumers, not to be confused, and the like, and the rights of multiple applicants and how are applicants' rights, and when you have more than one applicant, will there be, one of the concerns is that it was very, let's say it was a very capitalist system. Basically, if there were 2 applicants for any domain, top-level domain, they duked it out amongst themselves. They came up with some sort of deal, or they went to an auction. And if they couldn't agree on an auction where the loser got the money, then they went to a last chance auction where ICANN got the money. And Judith will be talking a little bit later about what ICANN's going to do with the well over $100 million of last chance money. Oh, sorry, well over $200 million of last chance money they got, which is almost as much as they got in application fees from the first round. Yeah, and only out of six winners in total. Paid almost as much as 70% of the applicants paid. So should it go that way next time? What can we do to get more applications from the global south? Did applicant support work for smaller applicants? The answer is, it didn't seem to, but what is the business that we're in? Should we be supporting applicants or just letting the system work? So there were probably 150 concepts in the report, and we got dozens of comments, many of which dealt with almost every concept. So it would be exponential to try to tell you what all of them were. As a matter of fact, one of the issues has been, in terms of the group, it's taken us so long to go through every comment to understand it and try to determine whether it really should change what was said in the initial report, that it's kind of been a very slow slog. The other half of the subsequent procedures working group is what's called Work Track 5, because there were 4 work tracks before that. And Work Track 5 is looking at geographic issues. The issues around geographic names are among the most contentious in ICANN, the ICANN space. You have governments and some members of civil society and others, as well as those who have developed community top-level domains or geographic top-level domains, who believe that governments or perhaps communities should have the right to veto any use of a term that happens to have or does have a geographic meaning. And in some cases, these are words that might be largely tied to a geographic place, or be the geographic place is so significant that the rights should almost everyone agrees should be protected, like Paris. But what about Golden, Colorado? Should Golden be protected and be given to the governments of the various places called Golden? And there are 3 or 4 of those. And so there's quite a bit of contention over what will happen. Right now, I would say that the most significant geographic names, countries, capital cities, regions, and territories are protected largely through a reservation system, and other names are, some other city names are protected to a lesser extent, and then other geographic terms are essentially not protected at all, although there are objection processes that could be used to make a claim that they shouldn't go forward. There are some in the group who believe that every geographic name, and depending upon what you look at, you could say there are 11 million of them. If you look at geonames.org, there are 11 million listed there, that all of those should be somehow reserved to the geographic name holder. Others who think that might be a little bit of overkill. And even the leadership of the group had to be delicately dealt with. So we have leadership, we have 5 co-chairs, one of whom is from the Governmental Advisory Committee, and one of whom is from the At-Large Advisory Committee, and so forth. So it's very much a delicate dance of trying to have bottom-up consensus-driven policy making and respect the positions of various people when there are very fundamental differences among them. Any other questions about the next round or geographic names issues?
Geographic names that applies to every domain? So Paris.nyc, Dallas.nyc?
At this point, what we're talking about is the top level. So this is .paris, .nyc, at least .nyc we know exists. You should all have a .nyc. I don't say that because I'm involved, just because it's a good idea. But in any case, there are many out there that, there's no .brooklyn yet. But we're talking about the top level, not the second level, but issues at the second level are also lurking in the wings. ICANN is known sometimes for having what I consider to be proxy battles. In other words, you fight about the top level because you're also concerned about the second level, or maybe even because you're only concerned about the second level, but you don't want to create the wrong precedent, so you fight about the top level.
Go ahead.
My name is Judith Hellerstein. I'm from Puerto Rico. I'm a student here at FIT. I also am a candidate for the ICANN fellowship.
Congratulations.
I wanted to ask within what you mentioned, broker, I live in Bushwick, and even though it's a top domain, how do you guys deal with the gentrification of having the surrounding cities, and how do you guys deal with your own infrastructure?
Well, one of the wonderful things about ICANN is that it has a narrow, the question was how does ICANN deal with the gentrification, say, in Bushwick and the issues of infrastructure? The ICANN has a fairly narrow technical remit. The Internet Society deals with all of those things, and Judith and I are both members of the Internet Society, but we're not here to talk about the Internet Society until we stop talking about ICANN 65. So ICANN has essentially a technical remit, which is to deal with the names and numbering system, and not to deal with content or the infrastructure of the internet with the physical layers, but just to deal with the addressing systems. That said, we did try in the previous round to create support systems and some financial support as well for smaller applicants from the global south, disadvantaged applicants, or financially relatively disadvantaged when competing with Amazon and Google, for instance. But that's about as far as it goes in this ecosystem.
I would say that it's not quite directly, it's because you're concerned with .NYC when it started, and a number of names were either specifically void or commercially used, a lot like the neighborhood names and some other ones.
And that's generally true of geographics, that they can reserve a number of domains based on their, a number of second-level domains based on their business plan. Yeah.
Hopefully it will never be a dot Brooklyn, but that's going to be Eleanor. We all have that on my see that way. So my question is for
He's a domain investor.
Next round of gTLDs, how many gTLDs are we looking at? Is there going to be 1,200? Is it going to be 500? Is there going to be 50,000? And is your objective to, so right now there's no limitation, right? So as long as you're able to choose, select whatever, dot, something, you can apply for it aside from geographically, or there is other limitations to it?
Well, there are a number of objection rights. Geographics and name collisions and certain other technical concerns are the only things that prevent a domain name, a top-level domain application from being started. However, there are a number of objection rights that can be put in place once an application is filed if there's a reason to object to it. So .Amazon itself is a geographic, but did not fall within any of the geographic categories that were protected in the previous round. We were also talking about the issue of whether top-level domains that some might see or all might see as being offensive to morals and public order should be prevented. There's also the trademark infringement at the top level, although we really didn't see much of that except between two different trademark owners that had the same mark, like Merck and Merck, which were one company until the Second World War, and now two separate companies that don't like each other, both wanted .Merck. So those are the issues there. But as far as how big the next round is going to be, I would say the best guess we have right now is about the same size overall as the previous round. So is roughly, there were about 1,200 names delegated. There were about 1,800 applications in total. Several hundred of those actually were contention sets. So there were only about 1,400 strings that were applied for, unique strings that were applied for. So the best guess is it's going to be about that size. Given that a number of gTLDs were relatively successful, I think we'll see a fair number of those, but there are also a number that were very unsuccessful. So people are going to look at the business models that worked and why they worked from the previous round. And if anybody knew exactly which ones would work, we'd be in a different world.
Okay. So we talked a little bit about, I guess we got close to the RPM stuff. So if you want to do a couple minutes on that, and then we're scheduled about a half hour, but it's good with a small group to do just this kind of free-form back and forth Q&A, so this is good. But just a couple minutes on RPMs, and then we'll let Judith take over for auction proceeds and at large.
Okay, so the other kind of really big working group that has been working for the last couple of years is the group that is reviewing the rights protection mechanisms in all generic top-level domains. And rights protection mechanisms, to be clear, are essentially trademark rights protection mechanisms, because once we chose back in the day to have domain names and not just numbers, to use words that had meaning, we have all sorts of fun issues like trademark issues and geographic issues. If everyone could remember a 32 number string, and remember hundreds of those, then we wouldn't have any of this problem, and none of us would be here. To be clear, are essentially trademark rights protection mechanisms, because once we chose back in the day to have domain names and not just numbers, to use words that had meaning, we have all sorts of fun issues like trademark issues and geographic issues. If everyone could remember a 32 number string, and remember hundreds of those, then we wouldn't have any of this problem, and none of us would be here. To be clear, are essentially. No, I don't normally like to listen to myself speak. It's bad enough when I'm listening to myself live. In any case, the Rights Protection Mechanism Working Group has been working through a number of different issues. It's been divided into two phases. The second phase, which hasn't come yet, we'll look at the UDRP, which is the Uniform Domain Name Dispute Resolution Procedure, which has been around for about 20 years, but this is really the first review that will happen. That one's not happening yet. What we've been looking at now are the rights that were created for the new gTLDs, which are essentially the Uniform Rapid Suspension, which is a quickie version of the UDRP, but only for essentially slam dunk cases of infringement, has a higher level of proof and a shorter time frame. And most recently, we've been discussing the Sunrise, which is a period prior to the general availability of domain names where trademark owners who have registered in the Trademark Clearinghouse can apply for their trademarks in advance of the general availability. This was created because of the large amount of cyber squatting, people who were grabbing domains that's identical to trademarks and then trying to sell them back to the owners or use them for less than savory purposes. And also the trademark claims rights protection mechanism, which is basically a notice that goes out to the potential applicant for a second level domain when they apply for it, and also goes to the trademark owner to let them know that somebody is applying for a domain that is identical to theirs, to their trademark. I was the co-chair of the Sunrise sub-team, and it was a we spent several months working through the various issues that arise in Sunrise. I think overall, we decided it was largely working. There are some issues with the Trademark Clearinghouse as to whether all of the marks that are registered in the Trademark Clearinghouse are valid, and whether there are some errors that may have been made by the Clearinghouse in terms of what they let in. But those will be dealt with really more in the Trademark Clearinghouse section of our review, which is, we've done half of it already, and now we're kind of going to go back and do more of it because we're masochists after we finish this.
How are you doing reviewing the UDRP new rules? So how is it going to be reviewed for the UDRP cases?
The UDRP is going to come in phase 2, so we really don't know yet at all how that review will be arranged. I mean, I think we will look at, the entire process. So if anybody here is not doing anything between about 2020 and 2023, you can feel free to join this phase 2. That's about how long I expect it will take and about when it'll start. The multi-stakeholder process is messy and slow, but the advantage is that everyone who's there gets heard, sometimes exhaustively and exhaustingly. So right now the sub-teams have finished their work, and their reports have been submitted to the full working group, which is several times larger than the 2 sub-teams combined. By and large, we're reviewing the work of the sub-teams, and I don't expect there to be massive changes because there was a lot of close attention to detail from a lot of very involved stakeholders from different stakeholder groups. I would say that given the issue, the groups that were most involved were trademark owners, domain investors, registries and registrars, so other groups seem to have less interest in this. As a sub-team chair, I was neutral, and also as somebody who participates both from an individual civil society basis and also has been an intellectual property lawyer. I look at this a couple of different ways, but I think the important thing here is to try to make sure it's fair, to avoid gaming, to avoid imbalance. I think both groups did a good job. They were led by people from different walks of the committee, of the group, of the area. I was the only one who had an intellectual property law background, although one was a lawyer who really participates entirely in civil society, and someone else was from Google, somebody else was from VeriSign. But the people who were involved came from all walks of life, as I mentioned. And I think that while there were tensions from time to time, I think ultimately we got into a good working understanding. And I would say also within that group, there are certain aspects of civil society and the non-commercial users constituency that were particularly concerned with the rights of registrants as opposed to the rights of end users generally. And they were also kind of had a piece of the pie, the stakeholder pie, if you will, in terms of having a position in there. But ultimately, as with the way this process works, you hopefully don't end up with an extreme. You end up with something that is a series of compromises, and consensus in ICANN has often been defined as everyone being equally unhappy, and I think we achieved that in these working groups. Thank you.
Thanks, Greg. Okay, so we'll stay in the gTLD space now. We'll move slightly. We talked very briefly about the auction proceeds. Judith has been heavily involved in the auction proceeds working group and has a lot of knowledge to impart with us on that. So Judith, if you want to give us just a few minutes about the auction proceeds working group.
Thanks so much, Joe. Yeah, so as the auction proceeds, as Greg was saying, is there was, so when they did the rights and the auctions, there were some of them that could not had a last auction, and it was mostly, I think, over 90% was settled prior to an auction, and there was only about a small percentage that had this last auction, but they also had very high amounts. And so it says to date, it was only 16 of the 218 contentions had the last resort auction. And then within that, there was only a smaller subset. And so these, mostly, it comes to be over 200 million on it. And what the group, as he said, it's a very messy process, very slow process. We've been working on this for 2 years and don't have that much to show about it. But what we do have is that we want to make sure that everyone is heard and all the different constituencies are part of this working group. This is a cross-constituency one. So what we had before is we had a series of questions, and then we work through them, and we also work through how are we going to disperse the money. And there has to be a kind of mechanism for dispersal. So we came upon we had 4 different mechanisms. So of the 4 mechanisms, one of them would be create a department within ICANN to handle all the work. Another one would be to create a department in ICANN, but work with a charitable trust to look at some of who's going to be getting the grants. So the charitable trust or the donor advised fund would then select the ones and then work with the ICANN group to make sure of due diligence and other things. A third would be set up a separate foundation, which is what many nonprofits has done. The Internet Society has set up a foundation. A lot of groups set up foundations within them. The last mechanism would be totally separate, a new group who just handles the auctions. And early on, we went through the community with a public comment on what's their feeling and discussions of what we've had discussions on this, and trying to get an understanding of what would they think of this, and what other conflict of interest would he have, or other transparency issues. And so we spent a long time trying to go over this, and then we got a lot of feedback from from the public comment on what it is, and so we spent a while discussing that. And we've now honed down to the mechanisms of looking at the first, we all but eliminated mechanism 4. We've tried to eliminate mechanism 3, but it hasn't really worked. So we're really looking at 1 to A, B, and C. And although there's a very strong, there is a majority of people who support mechanism B, and a smaller one who support A, but there's also a substantial amount that support C. And a lot of the discussions about this is there's a very big confusion on conflict of interest and cost. And there's a very strong group of people who believe strongly that whoever's giving out the grants needs to be totally independent and needs to have transparent and clear processes, and that also that there needs to be a process where if a grantee was refused and said, oh, well, your idea did not merit acceptance, there needs to be some kind of process where they can question that and get an explanation. But what we decided, it can't be the process that is like with the ICANN process with Amazon. That's too long. We have a very short time frame, so there's some kind of other process. But there needs to be some kind of feedback to these groups. Why are they not? And we also had a lot of discussions on what type of group can apply. So because ICANN is a nonprofit, there can't be any advocacy work or lobbying work. But there can be, and there also is a lot of discussion on that these auction proceeds were meant more for capacity building, and they shouldn't really go to something that the ICANN.org, which is the corporation, is really going to fund under its operating budget. So there's a lot of discussions of what is not on operating, what is, how much applicant support for the new gTLDs can be covered on there, how much capacity building on universal service, universal access can be covered, what else can be covered. We spent a long time trying to create what we call the preamble, is looking at what are the goals of ICANN, not just the small, narrow remit of names and numbers, but the overall open, interoperable internet, and one that is standards-based, because we want to make sure that anything that is done not only is accessible to everyone, and the best way of doing that is by having it standard-based, because then if you're using standards, it's more likely that things will be accessible to different communities. So that is also something that we are looking at, and we're coming shortly to put out a final report to go to public comment on that, to showcase the community. Now that we've gotten your ideas and we put them in, this is our final report, and to go forward with that, and then wrap up and hopefully move on to the next stage where we can solidify a mechanism, and then also choose a charity or a foundation or a way moving forward so that we can judge and the grants. And so the idea on the grants is it wouldn't be all at once. We would go through several different tranches. There could be larger tranches, and there could be multi-year projects, depending on what it is. But it would not be all at one time. There'll be several different tranches that will go forward, and that will give a chance to others to apply and to get the most of the, try to get a larger number of people who are applying.
Okay, great. Thanks, Judith. So are there any questions about the auction proceeds? We have about 15 minutes left, and I want to give Judith an opportunity to talk about at large a little bit, and then I'll talk a little bit about ways to be involved. But Greg, you have a... well,
No.
Maybe not.
I think we might skip GAC because we're a little short on time.
And Greg, maybe you want to also talk about the multi-stakeholder comment. There's a new, the public comment that was just put out on the multi-stakeholder and the strategy.
Well, you mentioned more generally that ICANN puts out things for public comment. Okay, that's better. Puts out reports for public comment constantly. There's probably half a dozen public comments open right now. Judith is mentioning one on enhancing the multi-stakeholder model, which is currently being debated within the ICANN community, but we want input from the broader community. If you go to the ICANN website, icann.org, and look under public comments, you'll see what public comments are being sought right now. So any of you could submit public comments. It's just you send it to an email address, and then it is reviewed by the working group, or sometimes by the ICANN board, or by another committee to do this. The other thing to keep in mind, so is, if you want to comment on the auction final report, auction proceeds final report, go and see that. Also, you should be thinking about any proposals you might have to help ICANN spend the over $200 million on a project of your choice.
Okay, great. Judith, do you want to give us just about maybe 5 minutes on at large, and then we can just talk a little bit about the fellowship and wrap up?
Sure. Okay. So one of the constituencies within ICANN is at large, and we represent the individual end users. And as we are in New York is one of the at-large structures within it, and we have flyers. So we are many different voices, all representing one internet. We have communities from Puerto Rico, Canada, US, the combination of academics, individual nonprofit, and individual end users, all working for the greater good. We were very active in many of different public comments. If you go into the at-large page, you can see the different public comments. We've taken out a listing of what are the hot topics. each of the individual groups is looking at certain hot topics. We also have anyone can join a weekly consolidated policy working group that looks at all these public comments that are out there, decides, do we want to respond, do we not want to respond? There's different working groups that do metrics. I'm chair of the technology task force, which looks at how ICANN uses the technology tools, looking at different, the big discussion is, we changed the web conferencing software, but there's also issues of knowledge management, there's issues of website, there's many different issues on there. And we have in the Consolidated Policy Working Group, we discuss the policy comment, and some of them are, the discussions are very wide-ranging. There's a lot of discussion because there's so many points of view within at-large. So if you're interested, we meet then. You can check up on the at-large page, atlarge.icann.org. And also you'll see a list of issue briefs and topics and talking points. So what we've tried to do now is, before each ICANN meeting, have a series of talking points that we can talk with the different constituencies and the different sessions, so make sure that at-large is all speaking with one voice, so people understand what our main concerns are and how we can react to them. And so that, I think, has sort of been helpful. Right now, we're gearing up for our summit in Montreal, which is called an at-large summit at Atlas, and looking at capacity building to try to bring out the next leaders. Prior to that, we're having the North American School of Internet Governance, and this woman over here was one of our students when she was still in Puerto Rico, the last one. And the school is going to also teach a lot of the information about internet governance on a 2-day session prior to the Atlas meeting. And the Atlas is also trying a series of capacity building to try to help bring out the next leaders, and working on trying to get them to understand different policy issues, different working groups, how to make working groups better. I don't know, Greg, maybe you want to add anything?
I'll just say generally the role of at-large is to represent the edge of the internet, the users who are at the edge, in essence, who are outsiders to the system. I'd say that almost everybody else who participates in ICANN is, to some extent, an insider, even if they are, in essence, the opposition to the structures in some cases. So the at-large has the generally impossible job, what we like impossible jobs, of representing at least the 3.7 billion connected people on the earth, as well as the 3.69 non-connected. We just crossed the 50% in the digital divide, but that was the easy 50%. Now we have to work on the second 50%, which is one of the main issues the Internet Society is dealing with in any case. So in New York, the Internet Society New York chapter, which I'm the president, is an at-large structure. So we participate in at-large, and I participate in at-large as the president and the representative of ISOC New York. Judith is a member of one of the chapters that's based in DC, but we have chapters that are based elsewhere. You can also join NARALO, which is the North American Regional At-Large Organization, which includes North America, oddly enough. You can join this as an individual member if you don't want to join an at-large structure like ISOC New York, but I encourage you to go to internetsociety.org, join the Internet Society, and join ISOC New York from there. And you can also, Judith and I are also founding officers of the Accessibility Special Interest Group, which is dealing with accessibility issues for the disabled, web and digital accessibility of all types. And so that's an important issue for us, and one that right now we are dealing with, as an Internet Society special interest group, but which we are going to also bring back into ICANN, as Judith indicated. ICANN has, accessibility issues that it needs to deal with, even if it's just its website needing to be more accessible, or its meetings needing to be more accessible. And its learning platform, ICANN Learn, where you can go to the ICANN website and learn all kinds of stuff about ICANN you didn't know, but you might have a harder time if you have certain disabilities. So we're constantly trying to push forward, at the same time, being mindful of the ICANN's technical remit, which largely keeps it out of the content business. So we don't deal with, movie censorship per se and things like that. But, since the web is a seamless web, things leak into each other. So mission creep is always an issue that we have to deal with. But at the same time, trying to keep the internet, working is really the ultimate issue. Joe?
Great, thank you. Okay, so that was a good intro into how you can get involved in some of the at-large stuff. Other ways you can get involved at ICANN, we have 3 kind of main ways to feed into the ICANN world if you are just starting to get interested and involved. We have our the ICANN Fellowship, which is you just have to be 21. And it doesn't matter where you live, you can apply for the ICANN Fellowship. The ICANN Fellowship fully funds you to the ICANN meeting. It's airfare, hotel, and a small stipend for the duration of the meeting. And the fellowship is a very intensive program. There's a whole orientation to ICANN, what it does, how the working groups work, and how you can sort of conduct yourself at the meeting and participate. So there's a whole core class that goes on throughout the week of the ICANN meeting, and then eventually toward the end you get to actually go into some of these working groups and policy development processes and kind of put your 2 cents in. At 2 of the ICANN meetings, not the one in Marrakech, but at the other 2 meetings, the community forum and the annual general meeting, we have public forums where anybody can get up to the microphone and address the audience, and a lot of our fellows are able to go up and make comments and ask questions there. The other program we have is called...
I just want to
interrupt. Go ahead.
I think another important part of the public forum is that you're addressing the board. The
board, yes.
And the senior management of ICANN as well. So the audience, your fellow stakeholders are listening, but you're able to actually, speak to the chairman of the board or the president of ICANN and say, what about this?
Yeah, good point. Thank you. The other program similar to the fellowship, but a little more restrictive, is the Next Gen at ICANN program. That's for folks that are between the ages of 18 and 30 and enrolled in an institution of higher learning. Same structure in the sense that fully funds you to the ICANN meeting. But again, they have those age restrictions, and then also you have to reside in the region that the ICANN meeting is taking place. So the next ICANN meeting is in Montreal. So for those of you that are based in North America and within those age requirements, you're able to apply for the Next Gen program. Sorry, yes, for Montreal they have. So so that is passed. But if you go to ICANN.org/fellowship, the deadlines for the next round of fellows are listed there, and also ICANN.org/nextgen. You can get more information on the NextGen program there. And then finally, for newcomers, we talked to, Greg mentioned learn.icann.org. That's where you can go. You have online classes. They're all free. Talk about introduction to ICANN, policy development processes, internet governance, the domain name system, some security stuff, a whole host of topics there, plenty of courses, so we encourage you to go to learn.icann.org to get more involved in that. We are just about at time, but maybe we'll take a couple of questions and then take it to the bar. Please.
Hi, I'm Zoe Filomeno. So I've worked freelance in the industry for LVMH, Jimmy Choo, Marquesa. And in the topics that come about is the so elusive emoji domain, and I wanted to know how ICANN is dealing with that in their meetings, and if anything has come about giving the registration process.
Which domain?
Emojis. So instead, it's just literally an emoji. You type emoji. Sorry, accent.
I don't think ICANN has really dealt with whether emojis can be used as top-level domains. I think so far they cannot. It wasn't until this 2012 round that anything other than Latin, ASCII letters and script could be used. In this system in 2012, we, for the first time, allowed applications for top-level domains and second-level domains in other scripts, whether it's Arabic or Sanskrit or Japanese or Chinese or Cyrillic or whatever it might be. And that is creating a challenge that Judith referred to, which is universal acceptance. Not only are we having longer top-level domains than we were generally used to with the three-letter .com, .mil, .edu, .org, .net, but we're having now domains at the first and second level in many other scripts, which then may get translated back into some form of ASCII through something called puny code, and I'm not even going to begin because I'm not a technical person to explain that. But I think that whatever the issues are, using emojis as a top-level domain probably is beyond the technical capacity of the internet. In any case, it would have to be translated back into some form of a binary anyway to be understood. So I think it's, at this point, the best you could probably do is maybe an emoticon if you could use some punctuation. But we'll go back to, going back to the first level of emojis. Maybe you could get a smiley face. But for that matter, you can only use 2 or 3 different you can use a hyphen and an underscore, and I think that's about it. So that's going to be a pretty boring emoticon. Yes?
Okay, thank you. When I come to this country, I started my career at the UN. There used to be a lot of meeting for ICANN. I remember the big one was what we call the World Society of Information Society, and it was in Geneva, and the idea was actually from Minnesota, if I recall very well. It was my early days. Now, I thought this has been an evolution from back then. All the big experts were there. As you know, there's a big department at the UN which deal with this kind of stuff. What has been left? What has been done since? I recall, like today, this big phrase which make a difference for us, at least for us from Africa, which was a speech by the former president of South Africa, who came with the expression of to bridge the digital divide. It was Mbeki. It was Mbeki who really pronounced that phrase for the first time at the UN. And most of us came up with new ideas to try to connect the African people to the global village of the information world. So I really thought we have made a lot of progress back then. I just didn't know we still have some technical issue about ICANN as of today, to be honest about it.
Well, I think there are always new issues that come up. And I think that, given, as I said before, that the digital divide still we've only just passed the 50% mark. So we have many millions, billions who are still left to be connected. And the challenges are greater on that side of the line. ICANN has, given its technical focus, there's only so much that it can do. At the same time, I think ICANN can and do more to, for instance, have more registrars based in Africa. A lot of the registrars that operate into Africa are actually based elsewhere. So Africa should have more of its own registrars for people buying second-level domains, and encourage more registries. If you're going to have new top-level domains, get more from Africa and from the global South generally, which to my mind also includes parts of the Bronx for that matter. But advantaging the disadvantaged is really the issue here. And the internet is a powerful force for public good. I don't want to stand on a soapbox, but it's very important for me, and I think for at large generally, which is one of the most international parts of ICANN, to continue to try to push ICANN to move outwards, but at the same time not confuse us for an organization that deals with content or that deals with physical infrastructure.
Maybe we could take one more and then we'll take the rest.
Sure, I'll make it good. So question, so back in 2012, large launch 1,200 gTLDs. How many of them are actually still live? How many of them went out of business? What happens when they go out of business? So let's say they run out of money, right? So they put in 185,000 and another 200 to run operations, and they were not able to sell enough. So let's say they sold 500 for the entire lifetime. What happens then?
Well, I don't know. We can. The quick answer first is that a number of domains or top-level domains were pulled back or discontinued before they launched, but those were primarily .brands who applied. The application process was a black box process, which means you didn't know who else was applying. So in some cases, companies were concerned that all of their competitors were applying and they didn't want to be left out. And then the black box was open and they found out their competitors didn't apply and they didn't really have an idea of how they were going to use the domain. So they basically, threw it back. Of the rest, the 1,200 are all, operating and delegated. And there are only a few that have not yet been delegated or not yet become active. But there are a number, as you indicate, that have a very low count of domains. In many cases, those are now being purchased by the successful companies, in some cases by the back-end providers like Affilius and those who provide the technical services to the front ends. So at the last couple of ICANN meetings, I saw for the first time signs in the exhibitors section that said, "We buy top-level domains." So basically, they're trying to get out of the business. The ultimate answer is that there's something called an EBRO, which is the emergency back-end operator that at least will pick up if the back-end is operated. And there are various business continuity plans so that a top-level domain won't go dark. There's kind of a registrar of last resort. There's a registry of last resort system, essentially. There's a net underneath it. But there is certainly a reckoning that's going to come at some point if some of these are so unused and unuseful and haven't found an audience. What is the point of a zombie TLD? It's a good question. On the other hand, what if somebody else picks it up and markets it better? And of course, there's always the question of who cares about top-level domains? I just put stuff in a search bar and off I go, or I just use apps. So I don't want to question the very existence and why we're here. But ultimately, there is a balance there, which is why we're not going to have 200,000 applications the next time around. But it's a good question. So it has been planned for. I think we may see various things happening. But right now, it's really just a market shakeout. That's the stage we're at now, is market shakeout.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Big thing I neglected to mention in my closing remarks is that the next meeting, ICANN 66, is in Montreal. So you don't have to be at the meeting to hear what's going on and participate. We have very good remote participation options. If you go to meetings.icann.org, you'll be able to see the schedule once it's up and be able to click in and visit the sessions that are there. This is actually a very good time zone. I believe it's the same time zone. Yeah. So good opportunities for you to get involved there. And we hope to see you maybe in person or online at ICANN 66. Chris had to sign off, but thank you to Judith and thank you to Greg and thank you all for being with us. Thank you to our hosts at Civic Hall. Please go grab a drink.